Economics for Living with Reverend David LeBeau via the magic of Zoom from California. And so welcome. We're happy to have you here. So David, we have a microphone. Can you see me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a microphone. I don't know if you wanted to take questions during your talk or at the end.
At the end of each segment, so there'll be about 5 opportunities.
Okay, all right. So welcome, David, and we're grateful.
Thank you. I'm delighted to see some familiar faces and happy to see some faces new to me, although you're pretty far back in the room. But my hope is that this can be an interactive workshop with opportunities to ask questions as we go along. We'll stop between kind of each segment for that opportunity. And we'll just kind of hold up an awareness of the 5 principles that were written by Connie Fillmore Bazzi, granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, back some 34 years ago, and see if we can interpret them 34 years later. At that time, I was at Unity Village attending ministerial school back in 1989, and things have been evolving ever since. So what I'm interested in doing with you today is seeing what it might look like if we integrated the wisdom from other spiritual currents flowing through our culture today, and by working with the words and ideas, we might better recognize what we can do to harness the power of our own awareness. Because to me, that power of our own awareness is a really important part of what Unity encourages us to be aware of and work with, and what all of the true, what might be called mystical schools of thought encourage us to be aware of. That's distinct from those schools of thought that just want us to say yes and do what we're told. Unity is not very good at that. For me, if we begin looking at, hopefully you've got the worksheet, that first principle, and there are essentially 3 versions. There's the first one that simply says God is. That's pretty wide open. The traditional one of the traditional ones is God is all good and active in everything, everywhere, which is a modification of the original one that Connie Fillmore Bazzi came up with back 34 years ago. What we're working with is something that says infinite mind is omnipresent, pure awareness, the one universal consciousness. And I just want to kind of hold up some of the reasons that this might be more helpful, more enlightening than some of the ones we've been using. And as it says on your sheet, God is not an external entity. According to Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, God is not a person who has set creation in motion and gone away and left it to run down like a clock. God is spirit, infinite mind, the immanent force and intelligence everywhere manifest in nature. God is the silent voice that speaks into visibility all the life that there is. Now this sort of focuses on life, and we know that that's just part of the evolution of our universe. But we'll focus there. There are a number of names that we've come up with through the ages to talk about this power or intelligence. You can see on your sheet there, God, Yahweh, Elohim, Jehovah, Ahura Mazda, Allah, Father. Those are some of the traditional ones. And one of the limitations they have is they make it you and me here and God over there. And what I'd like to try and help us do today is sort of bridge that gap and find a term that you can use that's more meaningful. You'll look at some of the other ones like being or beingness, Tao, infinite mind, pure awareness, universal consciousness, the absolute. You may have run across some other ones like that that don't sort of devolve the way God or Jehovah do to a personality, to something separate. We want something that can help break down that separation between us and spirit. So what I'm going to do is I want to just read some of these other terms and have you let you gently close your eyes and just see how that works in your consciousness. So letting your eyes gently close, just sitting calmly. What does being mean? Just that simple term, being. You might say these silently to yourself if you like. Or infinite mind. Pure awareness. Universal consciousness. The absolute. And letting your eyes gently open. There on the worksheet, it says the term I'm most comfortable with at this time is, and I'd like you to go ahead and take a moment to write something down. You can write down anything you want. These are not going to be turned in or graded. They're yours to keep just as a reference. We do want to look for ways to remove barriers to this perception of oneness which is available to us from sort of the mystical side of unity and other mystically oriented religions. Something that maybe describes limitlessness. Because we humans usually feel ourselves separate from what we assume God is. And that's an assumption that's just really not valid. Most formulations of first principle include the word good, particularly in unity. God is good and everywhere present. Now, preachers at the time, this is back in the late 1800s when unity was founded, there was a lot of God is good and people are bad. So one of the things that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore wanted to do was overcome that in a lot of their formulations of what we're talking about when we talk about God being good and not vengeful, not causing deliberately pain and suffering. It's sort of like the early Buddhists who strove for nirvana to avoid samsara. Samsara, of course, being a realm of suffering. And interestingly enough, nirvana simply means like a candle to blow out. So the suffering is gone, but there's nothing left. Nagarjuna, one of the principles in Buddhism, came up with this formulation. Form is not other than formlessness. Formlessness, not other than form. There's no dualism. What we're looking to establish is oneness. Now, do we sometimes think, something bad happens, like a divorce or a job layoff, and then we discover later on, well, this was an avenue to a better relationship. This was an avenue to a better job. So maybe it wasn't bad back in the beginning. What I simply want to raise the consciousness on is that it would be better not to make those judgments to begin with. To just say something is what it is, and rather than labeling it bad or good, that we later go back and edit. I'd like to, in this exploration, for this to be an exercise of your mind, to see if you can engage your whole body. So from time to time, we'll do more exercises where I ask you to close your eyes. Before we go on, does anyone have any questions or comments about this first principle, this first formulation about the difference between calling it God and maybe calling it the absolute or pure awareness? Well, then we'll boldly go where no one's gone before, maybe somewhere else. Let's read through the examples of the second principle. Principle number 2, which starts with I am. And we're naturally good because God's divinity is in us and in everyone. Now that was a real bold step forward when those kinds of principles were written. What about our consciousness is part of universal consciousness? Like the single wave is part of the vast ocean, identifiable yet never separate. What's part of what we want to do today is look for ways to bring together our identity with the infinite, rather than this continuing language of separateness that we've inherited, generally speaking. You might want to write in there on your worksheet, as a result of being part of, whatever you're planning to use, whatever terminology you'd like to work with. And then it goes on, positive attributes may be brought forth as demonstrated by many mystics and teachers, including Jesus, Siddhartha Gautama, who's called the Buddha, the awakened one, Teresa of Avila, Meister Eckhart, F.C. Happold, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, Emily Cady, Catherine Trevelyan, rebellion, and more. Just to kind of give you a list of names, and of course you can take this home and look at what some of these people have written. In the mystical tradition, in this sort of awareness that there is no separation between spirit and myself, and it may be helpful to see myself as illumined by certain creative powers, or what we call in unity the 12 powers, although you can see from the list on the sheet there, there's more than 12. What I'd like you to think about is that there are words like divinity that are often used. And what does that mean? You know, for example, according to the second principle, we have God's divinity is in us, with little clarity on what that means. These attributes, I hope, are a little more meaningful than divinity. And so if you're having a similar experience of experiencing universal consciousness through your waking consciousness, we'll have labels for attributes that you're likely to express to one degree or another. So what I'd like you to do now is read through that short list and see if there are 3 attributes that you would like to bring forth to a greater degree in your life right now. Rather than trying to bring all of these, or even just the 12 powers forth all at once, let's focus on just 3. So take a few moments, read through that whole list, maybe underline as you're going along, choosing these attributes, and perhaps using some with our creative endeavors will naturally bring them forth to a greater degree. So go ahead and go through the list, and where it says on your worksheet, 3 attributes I wish to express most are blank, blank, and blank. You'll have 3 blanks filled in. Go ahead and do that. Does anybody need more time? Are there any comments or questions that anyone would like to bring up at this point?
Hi, Reverend David.
Hi.
Hi, this is Joni. I think I'm going back to 1 and 2 as well, but like the concept of oneness is intellectually very fulfilling and exciting to contemplate, and feels intellectually truthful to me. But this is a dimension of duality. It's yes, no, day, night, good, bad. And so when we're in a situation of duality, where the essence of this existence is duality, how do you bring forth that unity into a lived experience and not an intellectual experience?
Good question. Because we're certainly in a culture that reinforces that whole notion of duality. You know, Democrats, Republicans, this, that, and the other. So that's clearly reinforced. But if we begin to look at nature, we begin to see that, yeah, we have what we call day and night. We also have dusk and dawn. Most astronomers are trained that there are something like 4 different periods of dusk, depending on how much light there remains in the sky. So what I want to point out is that the duality that we experience around us, and certainly there's a lot of it, it isn't complete. I mean, we can begin to shift in our own consciousness away from that, away from this binary choice of one or the other. And this is an opportunity to do that, to work within our language, particularly when we're attending unity functions, to practice doing otherwise. One of the interesting things, and it's been a challenge for me, is sort of dropping out of my language this notion of good, because it's embedded in the unity, early unity language. God is all good. Well, so what happens if I don't like something? Is that bad, or is that outside of God? Or, it gets pretty complicated. And I think we need a different understanding of what this universal mind, what the context is. So I would encourage you to look for ways of, even in the physical realm, stepping back from a binary choice and realizing that in many circumstances, it's more than binary. Now, sometimes we're reduced to a choice: am I going to do this or going to do that? But maybe we can change it into, I'm going to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and I'll get to that. And try and stop thinking of it in terms of just one or the other. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, David, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Can you come to the microphone, please? Thank you. Sorry.
You can say your name too, that'd be nice.
Hi, David. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm Bill Kazee. Yeah, I have a question. I discovered God late in life. I would call myself vacillating between atheism and agnosticism. But the point is this: when discussing with a friend what my beliefs were, I remember saying something to the order of, I believe that God is in all things, including you and me. And he said, oh, you're a pantheist. And I thought, okay. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Until I understand the actual use, or the original idea that, I guess from the Greeks, that God is, or there are multiple gods, which takes you right back into the duality as being separate from God. And I wonder, what is a more accurate way to think of it, or to explain it, or to describe it than a pantheist?
Good question. And the answer is pantheist, which is an added syllable. And that's a good question in terms of how do we see the reality around us? And I will admit that it's challenging to see a uniform sort of unity, speaking of unity, that's absolute, the absolute is everywhere present all the time. But if we'll look, we'll see more and more clearly that this division is really, really arbitrary. This division between God and not God, or good and bad, or those kinds of things. it's really arbitrary depending on our perspective at the time. And so what I would hope is that for those of us, particularly in unity, but in other mystic approaches to the divine, that we invite in our meditation or our prayer time, letting as many of those artificial divisions drop away, including within us. That rather than seeing us as in a dialogue with Spirit, seeing us, as we're going to be talking about, as the ocean is in a wave, that it's all one thing, although each wave is identifiable. It's all made of the one ocean. It's interesting when we talk about pantheism or panentheism. How that becomes a label that we may try to avoid, but I would just look at it like it's an interesting label. It's probably closer to what we are doing in unity or endeavor to do in unity than any other, so it's fine. I hope that's helpful. Are there any other questions?
Hi, David. It's Phyllis. I've always kind of had a problem with the Fillmore's statement of God is all good and active in everything, everywhere. That to me still speaks to separation. Because to me, God is everything. God is all power, everything. It's how we use that power that determines whether it's good or evil. It's how we use what is available to us in that divine that makes the separation or not. And if something is in everything, that means it's separate from everything. It is everything. Does that make sense? You're looking like it doesn't make sense.
I was right with you until you said it's in everything and separate from everything, and I got confused.
Okay, if it's in everything, there's an outside. Because you've got a dualism between in and out there.
Well,
Okay.
I would say that if we're going to say it's in everything, then we skip the dualism and just say it's in everything.
It is everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but to me, the big deal is that I don't like the God is all good because God is everything. It's how we use God that determines whether something is good or bad. To me, it's like there's an electric strip up in the sky or something, when you plug into it. So that electricity or that power is always there. It's how you plug into it and how you use it, whether you use it to heat a room or whether you use it to taser somebody. The power's the same. It's how you use it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
And I would agree with that what we want to identify, I think, in our spiritual journey is experiencing firsthand that beingness within us, which is what prayer and meditation are about. But I would agree that the good and the bad, that duality that gets set up and created there by the Fillmores, and recognize what was happening for the Fillmores back in the late 1800s was there was a lot of preaching that whatever happened to you was God's punishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God was a real angry, punishing God. And the Fillmores wanted to overcome that. And so in a lot of their formulations, God was good, but that just set up another category.
Right.
And we're trying to undo the categories and recognize that at a fundamental level, this thing we call God, and it's a terrible label in my view, this thing we call consciousness, the one consciousness, is omnipresent all the time. You know, it's what we learned in ministerial school, the three omnis: omnipresent, I don't know if I'll remember the other two, omniscient, omnipotent. But thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I agree that good is unnecessary, which is why you'll see there, for number 2, there is no, we've gotten away from naturally good and into our consciousness as part of the universal consciousness, like the single wave is part of the ocean. That's the kind of metaphor I'd like to see us move toward, rather than this one of using the term good, because of the alternative, well, then whatever is outside of that is bad. And one of the things I work at doing, and I want to encourage you to practice and work at, is let's don't label things good or bad. Because sometimes, often as a matter of fact, something that starts out looking good turns out not to work out very well, or vice versa. I can remember when my wife and I were here in California, we were buying a condominium in the 1980s, which is when there was a downturn in the economy. And so it seemed like it was a great thing to do until the money stopped flowing to the company that I worked for. And then there was a foreclosure. Well, that just is a pattern of things that happen. Deciding that they're good or bad really is generally unhelpful, if that makes sense. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just a comment, David. This is something I heard in Unity, that I don't know if it's good or bad, I just know that it's so. That's the punchline in a parable, but I heard it here in Unity. And then you were talking about the three omnis. I had written them down just before you had mentioned them. And again, this is something I heard in Unity, that God is not omnipresent, but rather omnipresence. And God is not omnipotent, but rather omnipotence. And so God is all power, rather than all powerful, all presence rather than all present. So again, just words, but that's the only comment I had. Thank you.
Thank you, because that is a better formulation than the one that was floating around ministerial school when I was there back in 1989. Great. We're working at more clearly identifying the spiritual realm that we're part of, that we're an integral part of, and seeing if we can get away from I'm this miserable sinner over here, and over here is God. And anything we can do to shift that language into something that's more unifying is a good way to go. Anything else?
Hi, David. Randy Craw. If one looks at life through dyads instead of triads, it is difficult. You could take joy and sadness as an extreme, but if you look at it from a middle point of view, depending on what you're what your objective is, sadness can sometimes bring great joy, and joy can sometimes also be looked at as great sadness, depending on what your objective is. I like to use triads when I go through my life processes: Father, Son, Holy Spirit, matter, antimatter, energy. There's the three entities that make life easier to process all this information that comes at us. And it's always wise, in my opinion, to ask yourself, what is the objective that we wish to accomplish? So what, as you mentioned before with the condo, what seemed good could be bad. And as we go through life, things evolve and grow, and always be aware that you can change it. If you want to look at it from a dyad perspective, great, but it becomes complicated, and it's easier now when you put it in a triad state, knowing that there's a middle ground that if you look at it from one perspective, could be good. Look at it from another perspective, could be bad. So the awareness factor of expansion other than left, right, up, down, but put it in a triad form, it makes it easier to transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that takes me back to ministerial school. We talked about that very thing of moving away from this binary process of judging, deciding. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? We ready to move on to our third principle? Reading through them, I create. We create our life experiences through our way of thinking and believing. And this rather long one that I've come up with, our life is molded by our beliefs, emotions, desires, attachments, and aversions, which we can exert control over only by becoming aware of them and choosing healthy emotions, positive thoughts, and good intentions. It's pretty long. But it was my way of first looking at what seems to show up in unity is this overemphasis on thinking and believing. There's a quotation, I'm going to see if I can find it. Oh, it's here, yeah, under 3. This is by Ramachandran, a psychiatrist. Our mental life is governed mainly by a cauldron of emotions, motives, and desires which we are barely conscious of. And what we call our conscious life is usually an elaborate post hoc rationalizations of things we really do for other reasons. That's a mouthful, but it points to the fact that we're often motivated by conflicting feelings, by conflicting desires, and that it's those desires and feelings that are often pushing the process that we just term thinking. And it's more than thinking. Which is why this long third principle, our life is molded by our beliefs, emotions, desires, attachments, and aversions, which we can exert control over only by becoming aware of them and choosing healthy emotions, positive thoughts, and good intentions. It's an exploration of the dynamics of living. So let's do an experiment as a quick reality check. What I'd like to do is ask you to stop for a minute and see what happens when we try to stop thinking. In a moment, I'll ask you to direct your attention to just feel your breath flowing in and out. Nothing else. Just a little vacation for our brain. If in that minute, the voice in your head starts up again or images pop in, without any judgment, just notice if you can the type of thought, whether it's planning or remembering or worrying, just noticing what showed up. So, let's begin. Just let your eyes gently close. Sit comfortably. Maybe put your hands in your lap. With your eyes gently closed, you may want to rest your awareness on your breath, feeling each in-breath and each out-breath. Just breathing and feeling our breathing as we do it. Well done. You might like to get a partner, someone you're sitting close to, and just discuss, what did you notice? What happened during that silent time when would have been very easy to have no thoughts at all? Was that possible? But what I'm hoping you noticed is that a thought process jumps up pretty quickly when we try to be still and brings with it its own concerns, worries, fears. And part of our work is simply working with what's going on inside us. According to psychiatrists like Ramachandra and Bruce Perry, who wrote the book What Happened to You in collaboration with Oprah Winfrey, our emotions are often driving our thoughts. And of course, the emotion that many politicians want to drive people's thoughts is fear. You know, if you don't vote for us, the end of the world will be coming tomorrow. And what emotion might help move us toward more wholeness, more abundance? So you might, on your sheet there, near the bottom, under Principle 3, I move toward wholeness and abundance by intending to feel more what? It's helpful as we're working with our spiritual growth process to aim maybe at experiencing more generosity, more joy, more gratitude, more enthusiasm, any of those positive terms can help us kind of orient our thinking, our action. And if you can come up with something under that and repeating the thought that, so this is where maybe we write down what we might call an affirmative thought, an affirmation of something you'd like to work on in your life right now. We are molding our lives moment by moment. And it's useful to be choosing to do the process as consciously as we can, rather than just letting the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that Shakespeare wrote determine how we feel today and what we're thinking about. In the books by Eric Butterworth and Ellen Davenport, there's a great deal of emphasis on being creators. Like infinite mind is creating the world moment by moment. To me, this thinking harkens back to the language of Genesis in the Bible. God created everything and is continuing to create. This thinking and language just brings us to the idea that we create our reality and can have any reality we want by just changing our thoughts. We can have all the abundance we want without a strain on the planet. And I feel like this overlooks the reality of having 8 billion people living with us on the planet. It also overlooks the inertia of reality. There's an example of what's called the elephant's tail. So the elephant is standing there and feels a fly land on its butt and swishes his tail. Now, does that move the elephant? No, the elephant has enough inertia that he's still standing there. Swishing his tail didn't knock him over. And it's taken many, many years of cosmic development to get here. And just holding thoughts often doesn't create much of a ripple in our experience. And what I'm talking about here is what I think of as, in my mind, is a sort of an extreme metaphysical position that we create our reality moment by moment. But it's not related to other people's reality. It's not related to the planet's reality. We create our reality. I would say we, through the process of our thinking, create the value we put on the experiences we're having, and certainly we have choices, lots of choices, often more choices than we recognize to make. But we're part of communities and part of institutions and part of an unfolding process in the world of our city and state and country and planet. And just our thinking a thought for 2 minutes is not likely to change that a whole lot. But we can influence the flavor of our life, if you will, the amount of joy we experience, how pleasant we are to be around, by working with the kinds of thoughts we think, Can we change our lives by changing our thoughts? Absolutely. But we need to change our beliefs and emotions too, and that's no small task. There have been many Damascus Road abrupt changes, many experiences of perhaps being born again, sort of a conversion experience that changes basic beliefs rapidly. An example is Jesus at his baptism by John. Seems to be an example of that rapid conversion. I mean, Jesus experiences the baptism and then separates himself for a while and comes back and begins teaching. That's a pretty rapid shift in consciousness and change. For most of it, it's probably a bit more gradual, and that's fine. The gradual method of slowly changing our beliefs, emotions, and thoughts. Is there a change that you're working on at this time? Perhaps a New Year's resolution. You may want to add that at the bottom of the page, maybe under the line of repeating the thought. If there's a particular resolution or change that you're working on in your life. In addition to words bringing about changes, we can also use images, visualization, and particularly in the area of healing, this approach may work more effectively. One of the leaders in this field is a woman by the name of Belarus Naperstek, who currently teaches guided imagery on the faculty of the University of Arizona at the Center for Integrative Medicine. An example of the way to use imagery is her work with her own daughter. Her daughter broke her collarbone and had to be in a sling, because you don't put a collarbone in a cast, but she was in a sling and had to avoid a lot of activities that took two hands. The sling in her arm was under a bulky sweater, and she just thought she looked rather dorky. She was 12 years old at the time, and 12-year-olds don't generally like to look dorky. So she turned to her mother, Belarus, and said, "Can you help me with this visualization thing that you've been helping cancer patients and other people with?" And Belarus said, "Well, sure, let's look at what a bone fracture looks like and what bringing more calcium to that position in the body might be like, flowing through the bloodstream, knitting the bone back together again, how it might feel warmer, it might itch." And they would sit together twice a day with the daughter's hand on the broken collarbone and Belarus on top. And Belarus said if nothing else was a great time with her daughter, sitting for 5 or 10 minutes talking about how the bones would knit back together, maybe be even stronger afterwards, and kind of doing some visualization of all the resources being pulled into this one spot that were needed to heal the bone, and how it might actually itch or not feel pleasant while the repair was in place. Well, the repair was supposed to take, according to the doctor, 6 weeks. At a 3-week evaluation, the bone was healed, the arm came out of the sling, and her daughter was quite happy about the outcome. And it's simply an example of how, particularly within our body, we can muster the resources that we have with imagery and taking the time to work with it. I'm thinking of an example in my own life that I've used to use this visualization to sort of speed up cuts and bruises and so forth. Most interesting to me was an experience of a patch of what's called seborrheic keratosis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right and the medical community won't be too upset. But it was this really dark, scaly, lumpy spot on my face. And I began using visualization and my idea was it was just going to disappear. It was going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and just disappear. Well, it didn't work that way. It got into a lump, and then it turned into what's sometimes called a skin tag. I made an appointment with dermatologists, and they said, well, if you want, we can just take it right off and, seal the spot there. We do want to make sure it's not cancerous, and so we'll do a biopsy on it if that's all right with you. And I said, that's fine with me. Let's do it that way. So while I wasn't able to do the whole process by myself, I got a dermatologist involved. The spot was gone. Biopsy was normal. There was no cancer. And I felt like I'd gotten help with the medical community in this process. So sometimes visualization and emotions that we engage when we're visualizing can be a lot more powerful than just words. And so but I do want to caution you to make sure to use accurate images and processes. Bella Ruth Naparstek in her book, Getting Well with Guided Imagery, was talking about a person she was working with who had a condition that he was using the imagery in the reverse process. This was diabetes, and actually he was clogging his veins and arteries with more blood sugar. So once they got the images correct, he speeded up his process of overcoming that. But it's important when you're working with images to get the image correct. Returning to the subject of abundance, which you'll notice at the bottom of the page, there's a little thing: to fully realize the abundance I already have flowing into my life, I'll create a monthly budget with a positive cash flow. This was something that, working in unity with the many prosperity classes we did, turned out to be one of the best things for people to manage this over the long term. Because often what motivates us to work with our finances is maybe we've gotten into debt, or something has happened, and we think, well, once this is dealt with, I can go back to the old way of doing things. And I just want to suggest that training ourselves to develop positive cash flow is much better than saying 5 minutes a day, I'm an abundant being in an abundant universe, I can have anything I want. That hasn't been my experience. Now, if you can make that work, more power to you. But I think something that we're working with here in Unity is our community being part of one, and that means recognizing the influences that are coming into our life, influences are going out, and working with that, especially with abundance, in a way that makes sense. Any comments or questions on principle number 3 before we move on to number 4?
It's Phyllis again. To me, there are two pieces to the word create. You have to have the thought first, and then you have to do something about it. There's an African proverb that says, pray but move your feet. Okay? So we create our thoughts. Our thoughts create what we want, but then we have to do something about it. We can't, just having the thought is not going to make it happen, in my opinion. So once you create with your thoughts and your imagination, then you have to put that thought and imagination into use, I guess is the only word I can think about, and do something with it. That's like that the page, down at the bottom of the page, you create a budget. You don't just say the 5 minutes of affirmation. You create a budget. You do something with that affirmation. So I think there are two pieces to the word create. It's not just thought. It's thought and then using the thought into action, putting it into action.
Well, good. And I would agree with that and say it almost is, in my mind, a 3-step process. That is, deciding perhaps what our ultimate goal is. That's the thought. And what do we want to do? Maybe we want to sell our house, move to California, buy a condominium, and take our grandson to the park on Saturday and Sunday mornings, which is kind of where Natalie and I have gone. Well, we come up with the idea first and are clear that that's what we want to do. We've got to fix up this house, sell it, buy someplace to live when we get out there. Okay. But then get our feelings involved, which helps us do the third thing, which is kind of put feet where they need to be to get these things done. Find realtors, find contractors to help do things in house repair that I'm not capable of doing. I would make it worse rather than better. So I would see it kind of as a 3-step process. Get clear what the goal is. What do I want to accomplish? Invest it with my emotions. Why do I want to do this? It'll be wonderful to be closer to our 2 sons who've lived out in California for years and years and years while we lived in Indiana, and we'd see them for very brief periods of time, although we and get that decision sort of fortified by the emotions of, our commitment to it, our willingness to do what's necessary, moving our cat out here who is not exactly happy with changing homes. But yes, very definitely there's a whole process involved in bringing about the reality that we'd like to have, that we'd like to see. And it often is a step-by-step process. But I would agree. The affirmation is just the first step in that process. Any other comments, questions? Let's move on to the 4th principle. You may have noticed, and I got into a discussion with someone about how really we're talking about the first 2 are more like principles, and the last 3, 4, and 5 are more like practices to bring those principles into reality, into action. But looking at the language of the 4th principle, we have a short description of the practice. I pray. That's pretty short. And then a long statement of a repetition of the notion that we're separate from infinite mind. The affirmative prayer through affirmative prayer and meditation, we connect with God and bringing about the good in our lives. So we're almost reinforcing that we're separate from God until we make this decision to work with infinite being, rather than seeing ourselves immersed in the presence of, and not in just sort of the outside presence of, but the interior presence of as well, of infinite being. So the third one is, when all mental activity ceases, I am that which is. An interesting way to begin a meditation, an interesting way to move away from the duality that we see in the first one. Through affirmative prayer and meditation, we connect with God and bring about good in our lives. It turns out to be pretty dualistic when we look at it. Prayer is a way to connect with infinite mind within ourselves for insight. I would experience my oneness with, and this is where you use that term that you picked back in the first principle, more quickly if I prayed and followed affirmative prayer on a daily basis. Meditation, which is kind of the direction we're heading in here, can take many forms depending on our goals and preferences. Popular forms include the passive meditation, and I've included a passage here. Mantra meditation, which is kind of a short passage. It may be as short as one word, it may be several words. Mindfulness of breath, breath counting, choiceless awareness, music meditation, which I might say is, at least in my training, has always been instrumental music. Visualization and walking and driving meditation. So there's a whole vast way to bring meditation, bring focused awareness into our lives more directly. And so what I'd like you to do, let's see. Is, and I don't know how many of you might have been introduced to the Unity format of meditation, but it was pretty busy. It had 5 different steps. So what I'd like to do is try a few of these, starting with a passage. So I'd like you to get settled in your chair. Let your eyes gently close. Maybe find a comfortable place for your hands. And repeat the phrases silently after me. I have the patience to accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So this could be a passage meditation that we would say on an ongoing basis, but we'll switch now to a mantra, which is really a short passage, maybe 1 or several words. In this case, repeat after me. I am one with infinite mind. Repeat it silently after me. I am one with infinite mind and feel a loving acceptance. I am one with infinite mind and feel a loving acceptance. And if you want to substitute something else in there for infinite mind, something else, let's do that one more time. I am one with and feel a loving acceptance. Switching to mindfulness of breath, just feel your breath. Just feel the inflow and the outflow. Without trying to make it deep or long, just your natural breath. Sometimes it's difficult to keep our attention here because our breath is so ubiquitous and uninteresting. We can add breath counting, counting up to 10 each exhalation. So try that. Silently say to yourself a number with each exhalation. 1, 2, all the way up to 10. Starting over again at 1. It's a helpful way to keep our attention focused on our breath and keep that dialogue in the head from starting up. Another more challenging type of meditation is what's called choiceless awareness. And as the name implies, we make no choice other than we're aware of whatever is in around us at the present moment. It's a way to keep our focus here and now without being restricted to just our breath. Whatever we're noticing, maybe our feet resting on the floor, or our shoulders, perhaps we can relax them even more than they are. We can be aware of our heartbeat. As well as our breathing, or in place of our breathing. Some of us are very visual people. It's a strength that we have. Another possibility for meditation is called peaceful place. And we'll practice it right now. And so what I'd like you to do is begin to bring to mind a peaceful place. What would be best is something from memory, maybe from your childhood, or as a young adult, you experienced a place that was particularly peaceful. For some people, it's some part of their childhood home, maybe the backyard. For other people, it's somewhere they went on a hike or vacation that seemed particularly peaceful. And so we bring the place as vividly to mind as we can. It may be in the woods or on a beach. A way of bringing ourselves into the present moment, and at the same time visualizing someplace we've been before. Then what I'd like you to do is Just take a deeper, more intentional breath. Just breathe in more deeply. Breathe out more slowly. And let your eyes open when you're ready. There are forms of meditation that you can do while walking or driving, and I want to just briefly touch on those. In walking meditation, it's probably best to pick some place where you're not going to run into a lot of traffic, foot traffic or car traffic. Walking along a path, maybe in a park. And just focusing on the walking, on the feel of the pressure coming onto the heel of our foot and going across the bottom and coming off the toes as we walk. Just a walking meditation in which the focus is on not some word we're saying or some image we're holding, but the experience of walking slowly. And of course, we can translate this to driving. Both of these, by the way, are open eye meditations. You may be surprised to be aware that Soto Zen is an open eye meditation. You sit in a room on a cushion in front of a blank wall and look at a blank wall. Now, I advocate walking and driving meditation as being a little more interesting than Soto Zen, but they hearken back to that practice, open eye meditation. And in a driving meditation, we're actually safer if we're doing a driving meditation because what it calls for is being absolutely present to the present moment experience. Not thinking about what we're going to do when we get there, not daydreaming, not playing music that reminds us of something in the past. In its most basic terms, driving meditation is called just driving. But we're feeling ourselves sitting in a comfortable chair. We're feeling the motion of the vehicle, operation that we have to do if we have to turn or slow down or speed up. All of those are part of the meditation, part of the practice, giving it our full attention. And actually, you're safer doing a driving meditation than what most of us do when we're driving, which is let our mind wander off to what we're going to do when we get where we're going, or back to the argument we had before we left, and how we're right and they're wrong, and you can see where I'm going. And I'd like to encourage you to, when you're driving, practice driving meditation. Be as fully present as you can and use things like stoplights, which we normally go, have to stop, as an invitation to bring ourselves back from wherever the mind may have wandered off to, planning, remembering, back to driving, and feeling ourselves sitting in the driver's seat or in the passenger seat if we're letting somebody else do the driving. It can be a meditation and actually, in my view, make you safer than our usual mode of driving and getting distracted. Now, I just do want to remind you, it's an open eye meditation, just like walking and Zen and Soto Zen sitting, open eye meditation. Now on your sheet, what I'd like you to do is to write in where it says meditation method that seems to suit me best at this time is, just fill in that blank. And this may change, and you may develop a whole cadre of meditation practices that you like to do. Hopefully that'll be the case. Any comments or questions before we go on to the fifth principle? Sounds like we're ready to go on. Let's read all three versions. Principle number 5. The first one is, I live. Second is, we do and give our best by living the truth we know, we make a difference. And the third, we use prayer and meditation on a daily basis to improve our lives and make our world a better place. The third principle is really about putting our spiritual work to practice in our daily lives. In a sense, living the truth we know, making a difference, using prayer and meditation on a daily basis to make our lives and the world a better place. To increase the likelihood of using the principles and tools we've looked at, I have a way to incorporate them into your day. So you can see it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's just take the time to fill in each one of these. Number 1, each day I will remind myself of my oneness with, and here's where you put in that type of meditation that you chose back in principle number 1. But a particular time each day. So go ahead and fill that in. In my case, I remind myself of my oneness with mindfulness, meditation, at 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. when I go to bed, generally, and when I get up. They're part of my routine, going to bed and waking up. But you may find that there's another time of day, maybe at lunchtime, that you want to practice. The second one, each day I will practice expressing the attributes, and this gets back to and there are 2 here, but there's certainly place for 3. The 3 attributes that we looked at back in that list that you wrote down on the other side of the page. 3 attributes I wish to express most are, go ahead and rewrite them here. And when, in particular, during the day, you'd like to do that. Well, I'm walking to the fitness center 3 days a week at 7:30 a.m. And before starting senior yoga practice 4 days a week, I like to remember those particular attributes that I'm working on, repeating them, visualizing myself doing them. Number 3, each day I will endeavor to feel and affirm. So this gets back to that feeling we would like to experience. Back on the first page, enthusiasm, joy, gratitude, contentment, or any other particularly positive emotion you'd like to work on experiencing on an ongoing basis. And affirm, and here again, place for an affirmation, repeating the thought that that would be number 3. Number 4, each day I'll take at least 5 minutes for whatever kind of meditation you want to do at whatever particular time you'd like to set as a practice time. It really does help if we kind of get clear on our intention that I'm going to be busy with a lot of things throughout the day. But there's a particular time, maybe it's first thing in the morning, maybe it's right after lunch or right before lunch, maybe it's as soon as I get home if that happens to be on a fairly regular time. For 5 minutes of meditation at what particular time? And fifth, on a regular basis, I'll connect with and support other people in a group using the truth I know. This is this opportunity to put truth into action. You know, as that fifth principle is, you know, to live the truth that I know, to put it into practice on a daily basis. And it's particularly important to use with groups because groups can often challenge us to be positive, to be thoughtful, to be generous, just because of the nature of groups. Thank you for joining me today in this exploration. Are there any questions, any comments that anyone would like to make?
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for going over the union basics. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
I became a member of the church today. My name is Michelle, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity of this moment in time where I could reflect on what's important to me and what's meaningful, and with such gratitude and appreciation. Namaste.
Let's take a moment to take a deep breath together, maybe to gently close our eyes and feel ourselves sitting. Take a moment to be grateful for all that has transpired to bring us to unity, put us on the path that we're on, greater wholeness, greater oneness. Amen. Thank you for being part of this group.